I'd like to bring in Quentin Peel, Associate Fellow with the Europe Programme at Chatham House. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. We heard there from Boris Johnson that he will step down, just not now, until a new leader of the Conservative Party is found. Given that, what can the Labour Party do?
Well, clearly what they are planning to do, table this vote of no confidence, but I don't think they'll win it because the Conservative Party, which has a very clear majority, it would hate to have an election now, particularly because this whole affair over Johnson and his very messy departure has really hit them in the polls. So that won't work for the Labour Party. I think really the question now is, will the Johnson game plan actually survive the backlash from the Conservative Party? Because there are a lot of people in the House of Commons who see that every week Johnson stays as Prime Minister is costing them votes. So they're going to be quite unhappy, and I think they'll try and accelerate the process of finding a successor so that he doesn't stay all the way until the party conference in October.
During his speech, Boris Johnson, of course, he spoke to the domestic audience, but he also spoke to the people of Ukraine. This conflict in Ukraine, it seems Boris Johnson has used it as a crutch to keep himself in office. Do you agree?
Yes, I think he's very deliberately exploited that. I wouldn't say he's being dishonest about how much he supports Ukraine. I think he feels very strongly about it. And in fact, he's very popular in Ukraine for having talked out about it so clearly. I also think, though, that there is no question but that any successor to Johnson would keep to pretty much the same line. I think there is a lot of popular support for the Ukraine in the war with Russia. Having said that, the crisis of energy prices is going to be huge when the winter comes again, and the crisis in the British economy. So both those things may make people feel really rather nervous about keeping the war going in Ukraine.
Who could be a likely replacement for Boris Johnson?
It's very difficult to say. There is a pretty broad field. I think the first thing you can say is that it almost certainly has to be somebody who supported Brexit, because that's where the grassroots of the party is still pretty united. But having said that, there are not desperately attractive candidates out there who look like they would have the sort of vote-winning capacity that Boris Johnson used to have. There's Rishi Sunak, the man who's just resigned as Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Finance Minister. He's certainly very competent, but maybe not very popular. There's Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, who clearly wants the job and has been preparing for it, has been very outspoken on Ukraine, but she is not regarded as she hasn't got that sort of popular touch. She tends to be very much on message. And there are several other candidates, all of whom are not going to be obvious choices. So I think it's a wide open contest.
With regards to Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, because both of them have taken very different approaches. Rishi Sunak, for the most part, he has stuck with the Prime Minister, but in the last 48 hours, he did tender his resignation. Liz Truss hasn't. The fact that Rishi Sunak quit the government, could that score him more points?
Do you know, it's very difficult to decide. Some people will regard him as having been a traitor. Other people will regard him as having got out in time. But a third group will say, why didn't you get out sooner? There obviously was a problem. So it could blow up in his face, or it could work well for him. I think we'll only see when the race really begins within the Conservative Party in the House of Commons.
Quentin Peel, Boris Johnson has managed to survive so many things, so many scandals, Partygate, pictures, what have you. What, in your assessment, was the final straw that you had the senior people, senior members of his cabinets who said this was enough. This is too much. It's too far.
Well, it all goes back to Johnson's character, without any question. The fact that he doesn't seem to have a strong attachment to telling the truth. Indeed, he tells lies or he glosses over things and simply makes things up. And what was happening, particularly in this latest scandal about a senior member of his administration who he appointed as the deputy chief whip in Parliament, who had been a known sexual predator. He'd been accused on several occasions, and Johnson just covered up the fact that he'd known about this and then asked his ministers to go out and repeat his words. And they were really angry that they were made, if you like, not to put too fine a point on it, to lie in public. And I think that blew up in his face very badly. But it was the same old story of Johnson asking people to get out and defend him and then changing the story.